For me, this was like low-fat vanilla ice cream. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we are going to be doing my October reading wrap-up. Alright, before I get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what is the best book that you read in October. I'm so sad this month is over. Unfortunately, it is one of the best months of the year. I talked about at the beginning of this month that I really wanted to try and prioritize scary books, horrors, thrillers, mysteries, and thankfully I definitely did that. I'm going to hope that this will be a trend moving forward and I'll start paying more attention to especially horror. Before I dive into my wrap up, just a little reminder for y'all, I am only going to be doing reviews of the books that I didn't read for specific videos. For example, I had a 5x5 witchy romance come out this month. I also had a Is Evernight Book Box Worth It reading vlog. Both of those have full reviews of every book that I talked about, so go watch them. Before we dive into them, let's start out with my stats. This month I read 10 books, and across those 10 books I read about 3,118 pages. That does include converting audiobook hours to pages, but in regard to audiobook hours, I just topped 74, so very audio heavy this month. My average rating was awesome, 4.0 even. That's fantastic. I'd love to see it. And unfortunately, I did have one DNF though. For my genre breakdown, as I said, I wanted to prioritize horrors, and you can definitely see that here. However, I did have one graphic novel, 4 horrors, and then 3 romances and 1 sci-fi. For the little goals I keep for myself, unfortunately, I didn't read a nonfiction book. I didn't read a book bigger than 450 pages, but I did read a comic / graphic novel. And then when it came to my series tracker, also wasn't super great. I started into 2 new series. I didn't continue any, and I didn't finish any. If you watched my October TBR, you would have seen that I actually ended up playing Becca's Bookopoly or Spookopoly for October throughout the month. So I rolled as the month continued, meaning I never knew what I was going to be reading next, excluding a weekend readathon that I did, which was part of my second weekly vlog, and I'll put a link to that in the cards if you're intrigued. So I thought it'd be interesting to go through these books in the order that I rolled them. I did, however, have one book that I didn't roll for Spookopoly, and that is because it was a book I needed to read for my Buds and Roses TBR jar challenge. I talked about this a good few times now. Put a link to the playlist up above if you're intrigued, but that book was The Law of Attraction by Nancy Naigle. Now this is sold as a contemporary romance story. In reality, I think I really would just say it's like contemporary. In the story, we're following Whitney, and she works in her family's law practice, specifically under the divorce division. They end up going a bit viral after a few of their clients realize that they end up meeting their significant other after having a divorce with these women. A few of them actually meet their significant other in these women's office. So they kind of become the divorce lawyers you want to go to in order to find love next. Unfortunately, these 2 sister-in-laws have been really trying to showcase their side of the business as more professional and are worried that this newfound fame is going to make them seem like a laughingstock and immature in comparison to the rest of the law practice. At the same time, Whitney also gets swept off her feet by Matthew, this really handsome artist who her mother ends up buying some of his work to decorate their law offices. This was perfectly fine, honestly. Probably the perfect book for some readers, but for me, this was like low-fat vanilla ice cream. It gave me the taste of a cute romance, but it didn't really satisfy what I want from a romance book. As I said, this came across more contemporary than romance. A lot of this book feels like you're just watching Whitney's life play out. It was a slice of life story, but it was kind of hard for me to get engaged just because I didn't really care that much for Whitney or Matthew. Neither of them really won me over. They were well developed enough, but like not so much that I fell in love with them. I also felt like the biggest conflict of the story, Whitney and her sister-in-law going viral, honestly, it just felt like it was really blown out of proportion. And so I was kind of scratching my head wondering, like, why would the firm be angry about receiving this free marketing that is all actually really positive? I will give it to Naigle though, this is a very easy read. I blasted through it in like 2 sittings, I think. It definitely reads like a Hallmark movie, and given the fact that some of Naigle's other work has been turned into Hallmark movies, makes perfect sense. I did think it was cool that Whitney worked in a family business. I really loved her friendship with her sister-in-law throughout the story. I also thought it was kind of fun to watch the blurred lines between boss and colleagues / family. Those are especially prevalent with her mother and her brother. Then there is Matthew, the handsome artist. Staying true to the Hallmark feel, he did come across a little too perfect. It's totally clean. You're just really seeing the beginning parts of their romance. I mean, I think there were a few kisses at the end. That was about it. By the end of the book, I did feel like having his perspective was pretty unnecessary, honestly. I don't think it really added to his personality. The elements of his side story didn't seem nearly as prevalent as Whitney's aspects. I don't know, his perspective just felt like it was filling pages. This was definitely a book that by the end of it, I think it's like one of those you want to turn your brain off to read, but that's just not really the kind of story I gravitate towards when I'm in that mood. I rather go for like a raunchy comedy. This was fine. It just wasn't really my taste. Like a 2.75 really, because again, it wasn't my kind of book. Now let's dive into the roles. So for the second, I landed on a Becca recommendation, which gave me a lot of problems because I went through probably 20 plus of her videos trying to find a book that was on my owned TBR and was a horror, a thriller, a mystery. I could not fulfill the second one, but I did grab something that was on my shelves, thankfully, and that was Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. This is the start of a graphic novel series in which we are following sort of a Romeo and Juliet situation in a sci-fi war. And at the start of the book, the woman of the couple ends up giving birth, and so that kind of just puts an even bigger target on their backs. The story itself is actually being told from the perspective of the child after the fact, which I do think is pretty cool. And honestly, I actually really enjoyed this. I've been wanting to pick it up for quite some time now. I've heard so many people talk about it. I'm probably one of the last ones on booktube who's getting to this. Don't let the graphic novel setup fool you, because this is definitely an adult series. Lots of swearing, lots of violence, sex, nudity, all that sort of stuff. A strange time, but I do feel like the authors were settling it into the world very well. I'm starting to get a feel for the setup of these two worlds and the tension between the two of them, and then also the relationship between these two and how they even came together in the first place, and the setup of how they're going to try and continue to survive. I already am really digging this. I think the art style is really well done. There are certain panels particularly where I really love the use of color, like this one, for example. I also think it's very cool that even though this is a sci-fi story, there's also magic involved in it. The father of our couple does have magic, and it seems like a lot of the times with his spells, he has to have some sort of a specific offering in order to make it work, which that's kind of interesting, and I can't wait to see more of that. I wasn't anticipating to start this series this month, but I'm glad that I finally did. This one ended up coming out to a 4-star. I didn't fall head over heels for it, but I'm definitely enjoying it already and excited to see more of it. Next, I landed on the Ghostface prompt, which was to read a book that had a sound-related word in the title. And given the fact that Becca said silence counts, I went with Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. I actually ended up picking this one up on audio and forcing Josh to listen to it with me anytime we were on a really long drive to one of our haunted houses for the season. That was because the sci-fi horror setup made me think that he would enjoy it, seeing as how Dead Space is one of his favorite video games, and I'm happy to report I was right. So in this book, we are following this crew who work in the very outer rim of space. Like they're right on the edge of where they have these all communication lines set up, and they end up stumbling upon this lost luxury liner, kind of reminiscent of a cruise ship that was actually the first giant spaceship to do this, and it was lost 20 years ago. Our team decides to try and get the spaceship back to known space so that it can be found and they can be credited with this and hopefully cash in on it. However, once the crew is on board, unsettling, creepy, scary things start to happen, and I'm not just talking about the many bodies they find on board. I'm so glad I finally got to this one because I really liked it. It was a slow setup because it actually has this past and present timeline aspect going on, and I really enjoyed the past timeline where we're getting to see the initial events of this team finding this ship, you know, starting to figure out what happened there. But then in the present, there were so many new questions that kept popping up. It did start to annoy me a little bit, but I really liked how the author ended up setting things up. There's a little bit of a romance between two of the characters that I wasn't super sold on and probably could have done without. But across the board, I actually really liked all of our main characters, barring one, I guess. He was a little annoying. And I enjoyed watching them and seeing like how they handled this whole situation and how the events ended up rolling out, how we ended up in this present timeline, because that, like I said, had given me so many more questions. I do think things dragged a little bit in the middle, but by the end of this was a interesting ride, and there was actually some aspects that seemed like really insignificant details in the beginning that became so prevalent with the final reveals. So I thought that was really smart on Barnes's part, and I am really intrigued to try out her newest work. This one ended up coming out to a 4-star for me, and I guess Josh would probably say somewhere around the same, but I'm glad that I finally got this read. Thankfully, it can also complete a book on my horror bingo TBR, so that works perfectly. After that, I landed on Feed Scroll. I kept landing on the corners for some reason, and so on that one, I went to my Instagram and kind of did the same thing where I scrolled through until I found a book that fell into the parameters I wanted. Thankfully, that wasn't too hard. I ended up getting The Return by Rachel Harrison, which I was very excited about, as this is the author's debut. I've really loved 2 books by this author already. In this one, we're following a group of 4 friends. These girls all went to college together, and they have stayed friends ever since, but unfortunately, one of them ends up going missing. She's actually gone for 2 years, and then one day she magically, randomly reappears. The 4 women end up going on a vacation together to kind of celebrate her return and reconnect. But once they're all together, they start to realize something's just not quite right with Julie, the friend who returned. This isn't the woman they know. She doesn't act quite the same. Her eating habits aren't the same. Even little things in the interactions they have just leave them scratching their heads, and they're not quite sure what's going on. As I said, I love the 2 books I read from this author previously, so I had really high expectations going into this one, even though it was her debut. And unfortunately, I do think that kind of shot myself in the foot a little bit. I'm not saying that and that I didn't like this book, because I did. And I think you can absolutely see how this author's work has improved, how her writing itself has improved, but there were elements that did bug me. I did still love the character work. I really enjoyed the themes that she wove throughout the story, the unsettling atmosphere, and especially the final climax and the final reveal. I really like what she ended up doing with that. Though our main character is 𝗖cie, we do have 3 other major main characters, because everyone in this friend group is really important. Every one of them is fully built out, fully fleshed out, and I really enjoyed seeing the dynamics between the group on the whole, the pairs of them, the trios between them. And I really appreciated that the start of this book was so slow and really dedicated the time to kind of understanding the relationship these women had, each of their personalities, and also the roles they just had in the group at large. But I did think in the middle things started to drag, because we were just so focused on watching these friends interact and slowly seeing how they process the changes Julie is showcasing. The writing itself is very dialogue heavy, and it does read very quickly, so I think that kind of really showcased to me that I was feeling the book dragging, because it should have read really fast, but at times I felt like it was taking so long for us to really develop anything. I also had a hard time with 𝗖cie as the main character, and I think that's just because she's not really a character I personally like. I do think she was a well-written, unlikable character, but I also had a difficult time rooting for her. And I think it's because she's really self-deprecating, she's very self-destructive, and it honestly just started to grate on me. I think actually the more we learned about her, the less I liked her and the less I rooted for her. But I did feel like by the end of the book, she had grown, and the confrontation of her grief at the climax I felt was really well done. But I did kind of wish we would have seen some of that happening a little bit sooner. I also think the horror itself was really well showcased. There are some really gory descriptions at times that were really nauseating. Like I said, I really loved how Harrison did the big reveal at the end, but I also think that element alone would make this book a little divisive. So again, I did like this, but it just wasn't the love that I've had for Harrison's other work. That did make it a little bit of a letdown, but it was still a 4-star. I did still enjoy my time with this one. When I landed on Mood Read, I was so excited to finally get around to Woman Eating by Claire Kohda. I've had this on so many TBRs. In fact, I also kind of slid it into my 5-star predictions tag. So I've really been wanting to get around to this one, and I finally did. And I think I liked the idea of this book a bit more than the execution, unfortunately. So in this story, we are following Lydia, who is a half vampire. She was turned when she was a child, and she's always lived with her mother, relied on her mother to take care of her and provide for her. However, now she has recently graduated from college, and she is officially moving out to live on her own for the first time. She also has taken her mother to live in an assisted care facility because unfortunately it seems like she is losing her grip on her sanity. Lydia is really coming into her own as a woman, but unfortunately there are aspects of her life that keep reminding her that she is not quite human. There were a lot of elements in this book that I really enjoyed seeing play out through the lens of vampirism, and I thought the way kohda presented them was really clever, but I also feel like she tried to juggle too much in a really short book. So unfortunately, I didn't feel like all of the themes going on in the story really got as much depth as I was wanting from them. There's disordered eating, mother issues, racial identity because Lydia is a mixed woman. There's art, the scene of it, the romance of it, the sexism and classism that happen within it. There's feminism, there's victimhood. As I said, her mother is also suffering from something sort of reminiscent to dementia, so there's aspects of that going on in this as well. There's also a little bit of a romance. There's just so much happening. Unfortunately, I really wish in particular that the art aspect was just completely removed, because those parts of the book honestly bored me the most, and I just didn't feel like they held up in comparison to some of the other themes being explored. I also wish the horror elements were utilized more, especially earlier on. I mean, like the last 10 pages do get pretty gory, but I wanted more of that. I wanted so much more of that. And I also think it would have been really interesting if the author would have utilized the horror to kind of reinforce the feminism and victimhood discussions she was doing. I did still have a lot of tabbing in this. There were some really phenomenal lines in the writing, and I very much enjoyed the sentiment around Lydia's character, but this came across as a more literary story than really horror, which, you know, just is unfortunate because I went in expecting a horror story. And there's definitely a reason that I don't tend to read many literary books, because I get bored. So this came out to about a 3.5 star. I do think I'm gonna keep it on my shelves because, like I said, there were some lines that I really enjoyed. I very much appreciated how the author presented eating disorders through Lydia's vampirism. I thought that was very clever, but this wasn't quite what I wanted. Next up was actually another mood read. This is another one that didn't technically fall into Spookopoly because I was like, you know, it's my birthday, I want to read what I want. So I picked up Hot Hex Boyfriend by Carly Bloom. I actually was lucky enough to receive a copy of this from Forever Publishing, so shout out to them. I really liked this. This is very much Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Hocus Pocus, and then like Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto. So in this story, we are following Delia, who has been told for most of her life that her family come from witches, and her family is purely made up of her female relatives. There's her grandmother, her great aunts, and her mother. They are known for being a little wacky, a little kooky, a little strange in their small town. Delia's kind of just come to accept this. She has also been told for most of her life that she is the one to officially bring back their magic because she was born under a blue moon, but she's kind of hit the point where she doesn't really believe in any of this. However, it makes her family happy, so she just plays along. Unfortunately, at the start of this book, her pseudo-grandfather who lived next door has recently passed, and his nephew, Max, ends up coming to try and take care of his affairs. Max actually is a witch and does in fact come from a society of witches. Turns out Delia's family actually did descend from witches, but somebody in his family cursed her line to no longer have their magic. And Max has not only been sent to take care of his uncle's affairs, but also to ensure that Delia doesn't somehow break the spell and actually give her family their magic back, because she is supposed to be a blue witch. Oh my gosh, guys, this was so freaking funny. There is a cat that can shapeshift into a human, so I know that's gonna be a big draw for a lot of people, have to mention it. It is really hallmarky and silly, but it did actually have a little bit of steam. It had more tension between the two characters. The family feels are absolutely phenomenal. I loved those. The romance between Max and Delia was so stinking cute. Oh my gosh. I also loved seeing the witchy characters who were very used to their witch society trying to live in this small Texas town, and the weird faux pas they kind of end up falling into, or the awkward interactions they have because they just don't understand human things. So hilarious. Off of that, I also gotta say it's filled with a lot of Southern charm. I was actually pleasantly surprised with the twist that happened with the mystery around like Delia's family and the curse that was taking place. I thought that was cleverly done. There's also this very ironic aspect of the story where it's clear to you pretty quickly what took place, but the characters have to put together what was going on there, and I really liked that too. So much freaking fun. 4 stars, absolutely keeping on my shelves. Highly, highly recommend. All right, and on that note, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me a frog emoji in the comments. Is it gonna focus? Focus on the little froggy. Ha, got it. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye.